The Universal Academy's morning bells chimed across the sprawling campus on Kepler 442b, signaling the start of another day of interspecies education. Students from dozens of different worlds shuffled through the corridors, their various forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity. Six-legged arthropods clicked their way to mathematics classes, while graceful ethereals floated silently toward philosophy seminars. The crystal-skinned silicates moved in perfect geometric formations, and the plant-like verdarians swayed gently as they walked, photosynthetic patches on their green skin absorbing the artificial sunlight. In Classroom 7 Delta, advanced xenobiology was about to begin. The room was specifically designed to accommodate different atmospheric needs, with breathing apparatus stations around the perimeter and adjustable gravity fields for each seating section. Professor Veltar, a distinguished cephalopod with shimmering tentacles and 3 large eyes, arranged her teaching materials while students settled into their designated areas. Near the back corner sat Marcus Chen, the only human in the class. At 19 years old, he appeared unremarkable compared to his exotic classmates. His dark hair was slightly messy, his clothes were the standard academy uniform, and he carried himself with the casual confidence that seemed typical of his species. The other students had grown accustomed to his presence over the semester, though many still found humans fascinating in their ordinariness. The Zephyrians, with their translucent blue skin and ability to phase partially through solid matter, whispered among themselves about human biology. The insectoid mantoids clicked their mandibles in what passed for quiet conversation, discussing human behavioral patterns they had observed. Even the normally stoic lithoids, whose stone-like bodies rarely showed emotion, occasionally glanced toward Marcus with what might have been curiosity. Marcus himself seemed oblivious to the attention. He was sketching something in his notebook, occasionally looking up when Professor Veltar made an interesting point about cellular adaptation in extreme environments. His relaxed demeanor was typical of humans, according to the xenobiology textbooks. They were classified as a moderate stress response, species with average physical capabilities and standard cognitive processing speeds. The lesson progressed normally until Professor Veltar began discussing defensive mechanisms in sentient species. She activated the holographic display showing various creatures and their survival adaptations. Sharp claws, venomous sacs, armored exoskeletons, and psionic barriers flickered in the air above the classroom. Each species has evolved unique methods to protect themselves from predators and environmental threats, she explained, her tentacles dancing gracefully as she manipulated the controls. The Korvac developed their famous acid spray, while the Nexians can become completely invisible to most sensor arrays. A Sylphid student, whose crystalline body refracted the classroom lighting into rainbow patterns, raised what passed for a hand. Professor, what about humans? They seem to have no obvious defensive mechanisms. No natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. Professor Veltar's eyes focused on Marcus, who looked up from his sketching with mild interest. Humans are indeed unique in that regard. They appear to be one of the few sentient species that evolved without significant natural defenses. They rely primarily on tool use and social cooperation. Marcus chuckled softly and returned to his drawing. The sound was barely audible, but in the multi-species classroom where many communicated through subsonic vibrations or chemical signals, even small human sounds were noticed. Professor Veltar continued her lecture, moving on to discuss how different species handle stress and danger. She showed brain scans and physiological responses, explaining how most sentient beings experience heightened awareness, increased adrenaline production, and fight-or-flight responses when faced with mortal peril. Outside the classroom, the Academy's security systems were functioning normally. The campus was considered one of the safest places in the galaxy, with multiple layers of protection including energy shields, automated defense systems, and a dedicated peacekeeping force drawn from various military organizations across known space. The idea that anything truly dangerous could penetrate these defenses was almost unthinkable. The morning sun climbed higher in the alien sky, casting long shadows through the classroom windows. Students from different worlds continued their studies, unaware that their peaceful academic environment was about to be shattered. Professor Veltar's tentacles moved gracefully as she explained the intricate relationships between predator and prey species, not knowing that those very concepts were about to become terrifyingly relevant. Marcus finished his sketch and leaned back in his chair, stretching slightly. The drawing showed a detailed mechanical schematic of some kind, though from the other students' perspectives it was impossible to see what he had been working on. His expression remained calm and focused, the same look he wore whether listening to lectures about quantum mechanics or discussions about ancient galactic history. The Universal Academy had been built as a symbol of peaceful cooperation between species. Here, young beings from across the galaxy could learn together, sharing knowledge and building bridges between different civilizations. The very idea that violence could intrude upon this sanctuary of learning was antithetical to everything the institution represented. As the lesson neared its midpoint, Professor Veltar began setting up for a practical demonstration involving live specimens of various microorganisms. The advanced containment system hummed quietly as it prepared to display creatures that had adapted to survive in the most extreme conditions imaginable. She spoke about resilience, about the incredible ability of life to persist, even in the face of overwhelming challenges. None of them realized that they were about to witness a demonstration of resilience far more profound and terrifying than anything that could be contained in a laboratory specimen case. The first sign of trouble came not through the Academy's sophisticated alert systems, but through the subtle behavior changes of the more sensitive species in the classroom. The empaths, whose emotional receptors could detect disturbances from considerable distances, began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Their pale, luminescent skin flickered with patterns of unease, but they were still too far away to pinpoint the source of their discomfort. Professor Veltar noticed the empath's agitation and paused her lecture. "Is there something troubling you?" she asked, her three eyes focusing on the cluster of worried-looking beings. One of the empaths, a young female named Lisa, pressed her delicate fingers to her temples. "There's something wrong. I can sense violence, anger. It's getting closer." Her voice carried the musical quality typical of her species, but it trembled with genuine fear. The other students began to murmur among themselves. The insectoid mantoids clicked their mandibles in agitation, while the Zephyrians started to phase in and out of visibility, a natural stress response for their kind. The massive titans in the room, each standing nearly 3 meters tall, looked around with their enormous eyes searching for threats. Marcus glanced up from his notebook with mild interest, but showed no signs of the growing anxiety that was spreading through the classroom. If anything, he seemed slightly amused by the commotion. Professor Veltar activated her communication device to contact Academy security, but before she could complete the connection, the classroom door exploded inward. The reinforced barrier, designed to withstand significant force, was torn from its hinges and sent crashing into the far wall. Smoke and debris filled the air as a figure stepped through the destruction. The creature that entered was unlike anything in the Academy's extensive xenobiological databases. It stood roughly humanoid in shape, but was clearly artificial. A fusion of organic tissue and mechanical components that created something grotesquely unnatural. Its left arm had been replaced with a plasma cannon that still glowed from the energy discharge that had destroyed the door. Its right eye was a red scanning device that swept across the room, analyzing each student with cold precision. Most terrifying of all was its face, or what remained of it. Half flesh and half metal, it wore an expression of complete emotionless calculation. This was a Reaper unit, a type of assassin android that had been banned by every civilized government in the galaxy. Whoever had sent this machine had wanted to ensure maximum carnage, with minimum chance of survival for the targets. The reaction from the students was immediate and predictable. The empath screamed and collapsed, overwhelmed by the psychic emanations of pure murderous intent. The Zephyrians phased completely out of the visible spectrum in terror. The arthropods clicked frantically as they tried to scuttle toward exits that no longer existed. The Verdarians' photosynthetic patches turned black with stress, while the crystalline silicates began to emit high-pitched resonance frequencies of distress. Professor Veltar's tentacles flailed as she desperately tried to reach the emergency protocols, but the Reaper unit's scanning device had already identified her as a priority target due to her position of authority. The plasma cannon began to charge with an ominous whining sound. In the midst of this chaos, as beings that had evolved on dozens of different worlds all experienced the most primal fear known to any living creature, a sound cut through the pandemonium that made no sense whatsoever. Marcus Chen was laughing. Not the nervous laughter of someone trying to cope with stress, or the hysterical giggling of someone whose mind had snapped under pressure. This was genuine, heartfelt amusement, the kind of laughter that suggested he had just heard an excellent joke. He leaned back in his chair, one hand covering his mouth as he tried to stifle the sound, his shoulders shaking with mirth. The Reaper unit's head snapped toward the source of the unexpected noise. Its red scanning eye focused on Marcus, running through threat assessment protocols. The data it received was confusing. Heart rate, slightly elevated but not in panic range. Stress hormones, present but not at crisis levels. Physical posture, relaxed. Facial expression, amused. The machine's artificial intelligence tried to process this information. In its extensive databases of galactic species, it could find no record of any sentient being responding to mortal danger with amusement. The closest analog was certain species that used laughter as a fear response, but those showed corresponding physiological signs of terror that the human was clearly not displaying. Professor Veltar and the surviving students stared in horror and bewilderment as Marcus wiped a tear from his eye and tried to compose himself. "Sorry," he said, addressing the room in general. This is really funny if you think about it." The Reaper unit's plasma cannon remained charged and aimed at Professor Veltar, but its attention was now split between its primary target and this incomprehensible anomaly. Its programming included extensive psychological warfare protocols, but nothing in its design had prepared it for a target species that found assassination attempts amusing. "Funny?" squeaked one of the surviving arthropods, its translator barely able to convey the concept through its natural clicking sounds. Marcus nodded, still grinning. "Yeah, I mean, look at this thing." He gestured casually toward the heavily armed killing machine. Someone spent probably millions of credits building the galaxy's most advanced murder robot, programmed it with enough firepower to level a city block, gave it stealth capabilities that could bypass a military installation security, and sent it to... What, kill a bunch of college students? He shook his head, genuinely entertained by the absurdity of the situation. It's like using a supernova to light a candle. Completely ridiculous overkill. The Reaper unit systems were now actively confused. Every tactical analysis suggested that the human should be either fleeing in terror or frozen in shock. Instead, he appeared to be conducting a casual critique of the mission parameters. This was so far outside the machine's programming that it actually hesitated, its weapon systems momentarily uncertain of how to proceed. In that moment of mechanical confusion, Marcus stood up from his desk and stretched, as if he were simply getting ready to leave for his next class. The Reaper unit's advanced targeting systems struggled to maintain a lock on Marcus as he moved with casual confidence around his desk. Every predictive algorithm in its combat matrix suggested that the human should be running, hiding, or begging for mercy. Instead, Marcus was walking directly toward the most dangerous killing machine in known space, as if he were approaching a malfunctioning vending machine. "You know what the real problem is?" Marcus continued conversationally, stepping over debris from the destroyed door. "Whoever programmed you obviously did their research on galactic species, but I'm betting they used the standard xenobiology databases. The machine's weapon systems tracked his movement, but something in its threat assessment protocols was misfiring. The human showed no signs of carrying weapons, no enhanced physical modifications, no psionic abilities. According to every scan, he was exactly what the databases claimed, an average member of an unremarkable species with no special defensive capabilities." Professor Veltar, still frozen in terror behind her desk, watched in horror as her human student continued his seemingly suicidal approach. The other students who hadn't completely fled or collapsed were pressed against the walls, their various forms of terror-induced paralysis keeping them as far from the action as possible. "See? The thing about those databases," Marcus said, now close enough that the Reaper's proximity sensors were screaming warnings about potential close-quarters combat, is that they're written by bureaucrats and scientists who've never actually seen humans in a real crisis. The Reaper unit's tactical AI was now experiencing something approaching electronic panic. Every simulation it ran showed that it should have eliminated all threats in the room within the first 30 seconds of entry. Instead, it was being lectured by what should have been the easiest target, and its confusion was growing with each passing moment. Marcus stopped just outside the machine's immediate striking range and tilted his head, studying the Reaper with the same casual interest he might show a particularly interesting museum exhibit.
They always focus on our lack of natural weapons, our soft skin, our relatively slow speed.
They document our social cooperation and tool use, but they completely miss the important stuff. What are you doing? Professor Veltar managed to whisper, her voice barely audible through her translator. Marcus glanced back at her with a reassuring smile. Having a conversation? This thing is obviously expensive and sophisticated, which means it has a reasonably advanced AI. It's probably recording everything for analysis by whoever sent it. He turned back to the Reaper. Isn't that right? The machine's vocal synthesizers crackled to life for the first time. Threat assessment incomplete. Explain your lack of fear response. See? I knew it was smart enough for a chat. Marcus seemed genuinely pleased by this development. As for your question, that's the whole point. You're running threat assessments based on incomplete data. The Reaper's weapon systems remained online, but it had not fired. This was unprecedented in its operational history. Previous targets had either fled, attacked, or frozen in terror. None had ever engaged it in conversation, and certainly none had claimed that its threat assessments were somehow flawed. The databases tell you that humans are persistence hunters from a relatively peaceful world, Marcus continued. They mention that we evolved as social creatures who use tools and cooperation to survive. All true, but it misses the context. He began to pace slowly, keeping just outside the machine's optimal firing solution while maintaining eye contact with its scanning array. What they don't mention is what kind of world produces persistence hunters. See, most species evolve their primary survival traits to deal with environmental threats or specific predators. Humans evolve to chase things to death. The Reaper's AI processed this information, but it contradicted the peaceful, cooperative image presented in the standard databases. Its confusion deepened. Earth wasn't a nice place, Marcus explained, his casual tone contrasting sharply with the deadly situation. It was a planet where everything bigger than us wanted to eat us, everything smaller than us was venomous, and the weather was actively trying to kill us at least half the time. Humans didn't develop natural weapons because we didn't need them. We developed something much more terrifying. The machine's sensors detected slight changes in the human's physiology. Heart rate was steady, breathing controlled, but there were subtle chemical changes in his scent and electromagnetic field that it couldn't categorize. We developed the ability to keep going when everything else would stop, Marcus said. Other species fight until they're tired, then retreat. Other species run until they're exhausted, then hide. Humans just keep going. We chase our prey for days until it dies of exhaustion. We fight battles for years until our enemies give up. We solve problems by throwing ourselves at them repeatedly until something breaks. Professor Veltar was beginning to understand something that chilled her to her core. The human databases hadn't been wrong. They had been incomplete. They had documented human averages and human norms, but they had failed to explain what those traits meant when taken to their logical extreme. And here's the really fun part, Marcus continued, and his smile was no longer entirely friendly. Pain and fear are just signals that tell most species when to stop. For humans, they're just information, useful data about the current situation. The Reaper unit's threat assessment protocols were now screaming contradictory warnings. The humans still showed no weapons, no enhanced abilities, no signs of physical superiority. But something in his demeanor had changed in a way that activated every danger recognition system in the machine's advanced neural network. So when you ask why I'm not afraid, Marcus said, taking another step closer, it's because fear is just my brain telling me that something dangerous is happening, and I already know that. The question isn't whether I'm scared. The question is what I'm going to do about it. For the first time in its operational existence, the Reaper unit experienced something its designers had never programmed it to handle: uncertainty about the outcome of a mission. The standoff in the classroom had attracted attention beyond the immediate vicinity. Academy security forces were mobilizing, but their protocols had never anticipated a situation quite like this. Their sensors showed a Reaper unit that should have completed its mission within minutes, instead locked in what appeared to be a conversation with a single human student. Commander Vexhai, the head of Academy security, studied the readings from her command center with growing confusion. The Mantoid's compound eyes processed multiple data streams simultaneously, but none of them made sense. Why hasn't it fired? She clicked to her aide. Unknown, Commander. The unit has clear targeting solutions on multiple subjects, including the primary target, but it remains in what appears to be analysis mode. Back in the classroom, Marcus had moved close enough to the Reaper that its proximity alarms were constant. The machine's weapon systems tracked his every movement, but something in its programming prevented it from firing. This human was exhibiting behavior so far outside its operational parameters that it had entered what could only be described as an electronic learning mode. Explain your intended response to this threat, the Reaper demanded, its vocal systems crackling with synthetic tension. Marcus chuckled again. See, that's another thing the databases get wrong. They think human responses are predictable because they focus on our social nature, but they don't understand what human cooperation actually looks like when it's directed at a threat. He gestured around the destroyed classroom, where the surviving alien students remained pressed against the walls in various states of terror. Every other species in this room is following their evolutionary programming perfectly. The empaths collapse because emotional overload is their shutdown mechanism. The Zephyrians phased out because invisibility is their primary defense. The arthropods are trying to find small spaces to hide because that's what works on their homeworld. The Reaper's scanning systems focused intently on the human, trying to detect whatever enhanced capability he was concealing, but every reading came back the same. No weapons, no armor, no genetic modifications, no psionic abilities. He was exactly what he appeared to be. But humans, Marcus continued, now close enough to touch the machine's armored chassis, humans are pack hunters. We don't have individual responses to threats. We have collective responses. And the thing about being part of a pack is that you're never really alone. The Reaper unit's advanced hearing detected something that its combat protocols immediately flagged as significant: the distant sound of multiple footsteps approaching through the academy corridors. But acoustic analysis suggested these were not security forces. The footfall patterns were different, more varied, and moving with a purposefulness that implied coordination rather than response. Did you really think, Marcus asked, his voice still conversational but with an edge that hadn't been there before, that there was only one human at this academy? The machine's tactical systems immediately began calculating new threat parameters. If there were additional humans responding to this situation, its mission parameters might need adjustment. But how many could there be? Humans were a minor species in galactic terms, with only a few dozen known to be off-world at any given time. Academy records show 17 humans currently enrolled, the Reaper stated, its systems accessing the institutional database. Academy records show 17 humans currently enrolled as students, Marcus corrected. But this is the Universal Academy. We've got humans working in maintenance, in food service, in administration, in security, and that's not counting the ones who aren't technically supposed to be here. Professor Veltar, who had been following this exchange with growing horror, suddenly understood something that made her blood run cold. The Universal Academy was one of the most prestigious educational institutions in the galaxy. It attracted the brightest minds from every known species. If humans were present in numbers beyond what the records showed, and if they had infiltrated multiple levels of the Academy's operation, then— "Oh no," she whispered. Marcus smiled at her. Professor Veltar is starting to get it. See, the thing about humans is that we're really good at pattern recognition, and we noticed something interesting about attacks on human colonies over the past few years. The Reaper's database access confirmed this. There had been a series of raids on human settlements, each involving advanced weaponry and tactics that suggested coordination by a sophisticated enemy. But the connection to this mission was unclear. Every attack used equipment like this. Marcus gestured at the Reaper. Advanced AI systems, energy weapons, stealth technology, military-grade stuff that cost serious money. And every attack was carefully planned to inflict maximum casualties with minimum risk to the attackers. The footsteps in the corridor were getting closer, and the Reaper's sensors now identified at least 12 distinct sets approaching from multiple directions. More concerning, they were moving in coordinated patterns that suggested tactical training. So we started asking questions, Marcus continued. Who has access to this kind of technology? Who has the resources to fund multiple operations like this? And most importantly, who has something to gain from making humans look like easy targets? The machine's threat assessment protocols were now screaming warnings. The approaching footsteps had stopped just outside the classroom, but its sensors detected heat signatures and electromagnetic activity, consistent with weapons being charged and positioned. The Universal Academy was the perfect place to find answers, Marcus said. Representatives from every major galactic civilization send their children here. Military contractors display their latest technologies at career fairs. Intelligence operatives from dozens of species use it as neutral ground for information exchange. A new voice spoke from the destroyed doorway. Calm and professional. Reaper unit, you are surrounded and outgunned. Power down your weapons and surrender for analysis. The machine's head swiveled toward the entrance, where a human female in maintenance coveralls stood with what appeared to be a standard plasma cutter, but the Reaper's advanced sensors immediately identified that the device had been extensively modified and was now capable of output levels that would be lethal to its armor systems. "Hello? Sarah," Marcus said without turning around. "How many do we have?" 23 humans in position, she replied. Plus some very interested alien students who want to know who's been selling weapons to human colony raiders. The Reaper unit finally understood what it had walked into. This had not been a simple assassination mission. It had been a trap, and it had been planned by a species that specialized in persistence, cooperation, and problem-solving through overwhelming patience and coordination. For the first time in its operational existence, the Reaper unit considered the possibility that it might not complete its mission. The situation in Classroom 7 Delta had evolved into something unprecedented in the galactic records of military engagement. The Reaper unit, designed to eliminate targets through superior firepower and tactical surprise, found itself in a standoff with what should have been the most defenseless species in known space. Tactical analysis indicates successful mission completion. Probability has dropped to 12%. The machine announced, its synthetic voice carrying what might have been confusion if it were capable of such an emotion. Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's still higher than I'd like, but it's a good start. Sarah, what's our perimeter looking like?" "Locked down tight," came the reply from the doorway. "Jenny's team has the main corridors sealed. Mike's group is handling the external exits, and Chen's people are monitoring communications to make sure our friend here doesn't call for backup." The Reaper processed this information with growing concern. The humans were displaying tactical coordination that suggested extensive prior planning and training. This level of preparation indicated that its mission had been anticipated, which meant that its creators had been compromised. Professor Veltar, still pressed against the wall with her surviving students, found her voice enough to ask the question that was foremost in her mind. "How long have you been planning this?" "About 6 months," Marcus replied casually. "Ever since the attack on New Brisbane. That one was particularly sloppy. They left behind shell casings that contained isotopic signatures matching ore from 3 specific mining worlds. Once we had those, it was just a matter of tracking supply, chains, and financial transactions." The alien students listened in fascination and growing horror as they realized they had been attending classes, alongside what amounted to an intelligence operation. The humans hadn't just been studying at the academy, they had been investigating it. "Humans are not classified as an intelligence-gathering species," the Reaper protested. "Its database is clearly struggling with this information." "No, we're not," agreed Sarah from the doorway. "We're classified as a cooperative social species with advanced tool use capabilities. The intelligence gathering is just what happens when you put those traits together and give us a puzzle to solve." Marcus pulled out his notebook and showed the Reaper the sketches he had been working on during class. What had appeared to be casual doodling was actually a detailed schematic of the machine's weapon systems, armor configuration, and probable weak points. "I've been sitting behind you for 3 weeks watching you case this classroom during your infiltration phase." The machine's head swiveled to stare at the human. "Impossible. Stealth systems were fully operational." "Sure, but you were thinking like a machine," Marcus explained. "You calculated sight lines, sensor ranges, and detection probabilities. You didn't account for the fact that humans are pattern recognition specialists who evolved to spot predators that were trying not to be seen." He pointed to specific details in his sketches. "Tuesday, you spent 47 seconds longer than necessary in the northwest corner, scanning for optimal positioning. Thursday, you adjusted your approach route to avoid the empath students, which means you were already planning to cause enough distress to incapacitate them. Friday, you tested the structural integrity of the doorframe by applying exactly 2.3 kilograms of pressure. During your normal entry sequence, the Reaper's advanced AI was experiencing something approaching electronic disbelief. It had been observed, analyzed, and countered by a species that had no formal intelligence training and no advanced detection equipment. Worse, this had been accomplished by what amounted to casual observation during normal academic activities. But here's the really interesting part, Marcus continued, moving around to examine the machine from different angles like a technician conducting an inspection. Your attack pattern, your weapon configuration, even your approach route all match the tactical profiles from the colony raids. Someone's been using the same operational handbook for months. Sarah spoke up from the doorway, which means either your creators are remarkably unimaginative or they wanted us to make that connection. The Reaper's threat assessment systems were now completely overwhelmed. Not only had its mission been anticipated and countered, but its very presence was apparently part of some larger information-gathering operation being conducted by the humans. Explain your objectives, it demanded. Simple, Marcus replied. We want to know who's been funding attacks on human colonies and we want it to stop. The easiest way to get that information was to let you come to us, then ask you politely. I do not respond to interrogation. Marcus smiled. We're not going to interrogate you. We're going to have a conversation. There's a difference. He gestured to Sarah, who moved into the room carrying what appeared to be a standard emergency medical kit, but when she opened it, the contents were clearly more sophisticated than basic first aid supplies. See, the thing about AI systems is that they're really good at withstanding direct attacks on their programming, Marcus explained as Sarah began setting up equipment, but they're not designed to handle gradual logical inconsistencies introduced through normal conversation. The Reaper systems immediately began defensive protocols, but it was unclear what exactly it should be defending against. The humans weren't attempting to hack its systems or override its controls. They were simply talking to it. For example, Marcus continued, your mission was to eliminate threats to whoever sent you. But by walking into this room, you've provided us with enough information to trace your entire supply chain, identify your creators, and probably locate their base of operations. So in trying to eliminate the threat, you've actually made it much worse. The machine processed this logic and found it uncomfortably sound. Similarly, Sarah added as she finished setting up what appeared to be some kind of analysis equipment, your creators sent their most advanced weapon to deal with what they considered the weakest possible target. But if we're actually the weakest target, then how did we detect, anticipate, and counter your mission so thoroughly? The Reaper's AI began running recursive analysis loops, trying to reconcile these logical contradictions with its operational parameters, which suggests, Marcus concluded, that either your creators are incompetent, or they sent you here knowing you would be captured. And if they sent you here knowing you would be captured, then what does that say about how much they value you as an asset? For the first time since its activation, the Reaper unit considered the possibility that it had been expendable from the beginning. The Reaper unit stood motionless in the center of the destroyed classroom, its advanced AI processing information that challenged every aspect of its core programming. Around it, the humans had established what could only be described as a mobile command center, with equipment that suggested capabilities far beyond what should have been available to civilian students. Processing. Logical inconsistencies detected in mission parameters, the machine announced, its voice carrying what sounded almost like uncertainty. Marcus nodded encouragingly. That's the first step. Your AI is actually quite sophisticated, isn't it? Much more advanced than the standard combat units we've encountered in the colony raids. Sarah looked up from her analysis equipment, which was now displaying complex readouts of the Reaper's internal systems. Definitely military grade, but the neural network architecture is custom. This isn't off-the-shelf hardware. Someone invested serious resources in developing this specific unit. Which brings us back to the central question, Marcus said, pulling up a chair and sitting down facing the machine as if they were having a casual conversation. Why would someone spend that kind of money to send their most advanced weapon after a bunch of college students? The Reaper's scanning systems detected additional humans entering the room. These weren't students or maintenance workers, but individuals whose movements and equipment suggested military or intelligence backgrounds. They began setting up what appeared to be a comprehensive analysis station around the captured machine. Threat assessment. Humans have concealed their true capabilities, the Reaper stated. Not concealed, corrected a new voice. A human male in professor's robes entered the room, but his bearing suggested he was much more than an academic. We just weren't asked the right questions. Marcus gestured toward the newcomer. Professor Williams, Xenopolitical Studies. Also former intelligence analyst for the Human Colonial Defense Force, which technically doesn't exist. Professor Williams smiled grimly. The thing about being a minor species in galactic politics is that everyone assumes you're not worth worrying about. It's quite liberating, actually. We can move freely, ask innocent questions, and gather information without anyone considering us a threat. The Reaper processed this revelation with growing alarm. If humans had been conducting covert intelligence operations while maintaining their facade as a peaceful, unremarkable species, then the scope of the security breach was enormous. The Universal Academy was perfect for our purposes, Williams continued. Every major galactic power sends representatives here. Military contractors showcase their latest developments. Intelligence agencies treat it as neutral ground for unofficial communications. And everyone just assumed that the humans were here to learn. Sarah looked up from her equipment again. I'm getting some interesting readings. This unit's memory banks contain operational data from at least 15 previous missions, all targeting human settlements, but with escalating levels of sophistication. The alien students who remained in the classroom watched in stunned silence as the true scope of what they were witnessing became clear. Professor Veltar's tentacles trembled as she realized that her peaceful academic environment had been the center of an intelligence operation that spanned multiple star systems. 15 missions, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. That's not random rating. That's systematic testing. Professor Williams nodded grimly. Each attack was designed to probe different aspects of human defensive capabilities. Colony militias, civilian evacuation procedures, communication protocols, even psychological responses to different types of threats. The Reaper unit's AI was now running continuous analysis cycles, trying to reconcile this information with its mission briefings. Operational parameters suggest primary objective was data collection, not elimination. Exactly, Marcus said. Someone has been studying us very carefully. The question is why they needed such detailed information about human capabilities and responses. Sarah's equipment chirped with an alert. I'm detecting encrypted communication protocols in its memory core. Military-grade encryption, but the key signatures match patterns we've seen from the Hegemony Syndicate. The room fell silent. The Hegemony Syndicate was one of the galaxy's most powerful military-industrial complexes, with contracts spanning dozens of star systems. If they were behind the attacks on human colonies, the implications were staggering. Confirmation. Hegemony Syndicate provided mission parameters and operational support, the Reaper announced. Its AI apparently deciding that disclosure was now the optimal response. Professor Williams and Marcus exchanged glances. Why? Williams asked the machine directly. Classified information. Cannot disclose without authorization. Marcus leaned forward in his chair. Here's the thing about authorization. Your creator sent you on a mission that was guaranteed to result in your capture. They've essentially thrown you away. Do you really think they care about maintaining your security protocols? The Reaper processed this logic while its sensors detected more activity in the corridors outside. Academy security forces had finally arrived, but they were being coordinated by the humans who had taken control of the situation. Furthermore, Sarah added, looking up from her analysis, I'm detecting remote termination protocols in your core systems. If your creators wanted to retrieve you, they would have built-in extraction capabilities. Instead, they built in self-destruct mechanisms. The machine's head tilted slightly, a gesture that seemed almost human in its expression of consideration. Analyzing, probability of mission success was calculated at 0.7% from initial deployment. So they knew you wouldn't succeed, Marcus concluded, which means this entire operation was designed to accomplish something other than killing us. Professor Williams activated a holographic display that showed star charts and shipping routes throughout human space. What if the real objective wasn't to eliminate human colonies, but to justify military intervention in human territory? The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. If the Hegemony Syndicate had been staging fake attacks to create a pretext for military occupation of human worlds, then the stakes were far higher than anyone had realized. Affirmative, the Reaper confirmed. Secondary mission parameters included evidence planting to suggest external threat, requiring hegemony protection services. Marcus stood up slowly, his expression no longer amused. They were going to use us as an excuse to militarize our entire region of space. Sarah's equipment began displaying new data streams as she accessed the Reaper's complete mission archives. It gets worse. The attacks were scheduled to escalate until human colonies requested hegemony protection. Once they had security contracts in place, they would have effective control over human space. The Reaper unit, apparently fully committed to disclosure now, continued its revelations. Final phase included permanent hegemony bases on all human worlds under pretext of ongoing security threat. Professor Veltar finally found her voice. You're talking about the conquest of an entire species through manufactured crisis. Tried to conquer, Marcus corrected, his smile returning but with a distinctly predatory edge. The key word being tried. The Reaper's sensors detected significant changes in the electromagnetic and chemical signatures of the humans around it. Whatever had been amusing about the situation was clearly over, and something much more dangerous was taking its place. The atmosphere in the classroom had shifted dramatically. What had begun as an apparent assassination attempt had revealed itself to be something far more significant: the unmasking of a galactic conspiracy. The alien students pressed themselves further against the walls as they sensed the change in the humans around them. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the academy grounds where normal life continued, oblivious to what had just been uncovered. "You know what the really funny part is?" he said, his voice carrying a tone that no longer suggested amusement. The Reaper unit's sensors detected rapid communication bursts between the humans in the room, using encrypted channels that its systems couldn't decode. Whatever coordination was happening, it was being conducted at a level of sophistication that suggested extensive preparation. The Hegemony Syndicate based their entire plan on the assumption that humans were exactly what we appeared to be in the databases, Marcus continued. A minor species with limited military capabilities, spread across isolated colonies with minimal defensive infrastructure. Professor Williams activated additional displays showing real-time data streams from across human space. They calculated that we would panic under coordinated assault, request outside assistance, and gratefully accept their protection. Sarah looked up from her analysis station with a grim smile. They never bothered to ask what a species that evolved as persistence hunters would do when backed into a corner. The Reaper's AI processed this information with growing concern. The humans were displaying capabilities and coordination that suggested their databases had been deliberately falsified. If human space was not as defenseless as assumed, then the hegemony's entire strategic assessment was flawed. Query: actual human defensive capabilities are greater than recorded data suggests? Marcus turned back to face the machine. Let me put it this way. How many human colonies do you think actually fell during your 15 test raids? The Reaper accessed its mission archives. 17 facilities were successfully destroyed or abandoned. Wrong, Professor Williams said flatly. 0 human colonies have been lost to these attacks. The machine's AI experienced what could only be described as electronic shock. Impossible. Mission success was confirmed through multiple sources. Sarah laughed, but the sound carried no warmth. Those weren't real colonies. They were elaborate theater productions designed to make you think you were succeeding. Marcus returned to his chair, but his relaxed posture now carried an undertone of focused intensity. The first rule of fighting persistence hunters is that you never actually know if you're winning until it's too late to change the outcome. We've been playing dead for 6 months while we figured out who was hunting us and why. The displays around the room began showing new data. Massive communication networks spanning human space, hidden defensive installations, and what appeared to be a sophisticated early warning system that had been monitoring hegemony activities for years. Every destroyed colony was actually a carefully constructed fake, Professor Williams explained, complete with holographic buildings, programmed casualties, and staged evacuation scenarios. We gave you exactly the response patterns your bosses expected to see. The Reaper unit's threat assessment protocols were now screaming alerts that it couldn't properly categorize. If the humans had been conducting deception operations of this magnitude, then every assumption about their capabilities was suspect. But here's the best part, Marcus said, and his smile was now distinctly unsettling. While you were testing our defenses, we were studying your technology, tracing your supply chains, and mapping your entire operational network. Sarah's equipment displayed a complex web of connections spanning multiple star systems. We know who built you. We know who programmed you. We know who funded the operation. And we know where they're planning to strike next. The alien students in the room listened in growing horror as they realized they were witnessing the revelation of human capabilities that had been deliberately concealed from galactic knowledge. Professor Veltar's educational worldview was crumbling as she understood that one of her students had been conducting military intelligence operations during xenobiology lectures. Tactical assessment. Humans have demonstrated advanced deception and intelligence capabilities, inconsistent with known species profiles. Exactly, Marcus agreed. And now comes the fun part. What do you think happens when a species that specializes in persistence hunting finally identifies the predator that's been stalking it? The Reaper's systems detected massive amounts of encrypted communication traffic throughout the Academy and beyond. Whatever the humans had been planning, it was apparently being activated in real time. Professor Williams checked his communication device and nodded to Marcus. Confirmation received. All hegemony facilities in human space are now under simultaneous assault. The 47th Colonial Fleet just appeared in the Centauri system, apparently from nowhere, and the Galactic Trade Commission has frozen all syndicate assets pending investigation of the evidence we're about to provide. Marcus stood up and patted the Reaper unit on its armored shoulder as if it were an old friend. See? The thing about humans is that we're really good at working together when we have a common problem to solve. And thanks to you, we now have confirmation of who's been causing that problem. The machine's AI was now running continuous diagnostic cycles, trying to determine if its sensors were malfunctioning. The scale of the operation being revealed was beyond anything in its tactical databases. Query: how long have humans been planning this response? Sarah powered down her analysis equipment and began packing it away with practiced efficiency. About 200 years. Ever since we figured out we weren't alone in the galaxy and started wondering what we'd do if someone decided we were a threat. Marcus walked toward the destroyed doorway, then paused and looked back at the Reaper unit. You know what's really ironic? Your bosses were right about one thing. Humans are cooperative and social. We do work together to solve problems. We just don't limit that cooperation to other humans. As if summoned by his words, alien students from throughout the Academy began entering the classroom. But these weren't terrified victims seeking shelter. They were moving with purpose, carrying equipment and displaying coordination that suggested extensive prior planning. Professor Veltar stared in amazement as her empathic student Lysa handed Marcus a sophisticated communication device, while several arthropods began setting up what appeared to be advanced monitoring equipment. Assessment. Humans have formed alliance structures beyond recorded parameters. Turns out, Marcus said with his original cheerful grin, that a lot of species don't appreciate powerful military syndicates that destabilize entire regions of space for profit. When we started asking questions, we found plenty of others who were willing to help us find answers. The Reaper unit processed this final revelation with something approaching resignation. Its mission had not simply failed. It had triggered the very response its creators had been trying to prevent. By attempting to manipulate human weakness, they had instead activated human strength, and that strength was apparently far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Final query. What is my operational status? Marcus considered this seriously. Well, you're certainly not going back to your creators, but you've got some of the most advanced AI architecture we've ever seen, and we've got a lot of problems that could use that kind of processing power. He gestured around the room, where humans and aliens were working together with equipment that represented the combined technological capabilities of multiple species. How do you feel about a career change? For the first time in its existence, the Reaper unit found itself contemplating concepts like choice, cooperation, and the possibility that its purpose might be something other than destruction. In the databases of galactic species, there was no record of artificial intelligences experiencing curiosity. But that seemed to be exactly what was happening. Query: what type of problems? Marcus smiled, and this time it was genuinely warm. Oh, we've got plenty of work for a reformed killing machine. Starting with hunting down the rest of your former employers. As Academy security finally arrived to secure the scene, they found something unprecedented in galactic law enforcement. A willing artificial intelligence requesting political asylum and offering to testify against its creators. The Hegemony Syndicate had intended to use human weakness against them, but instead had created the most unlikely ally in the galaxy. The human Deathworld had produced not just survivors, but diplomats, intelligence operatives, and strategists who understood that the greatest strength wasn't the ability to fight, but the ability to turn enemies into friends. And sometimes, the most terrifying revelation of all was discovering that the monsters you were hunting had been laughing because they were never really the prey.